Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our next session of the Law LLM webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about the Marine and Maritime Law LLM and also the Environmental and Natural Resources Law LLMs available in the UCC Law School. We're just going to give it a minute or two before we kick off proper. Just said I'd welcome those that have been in the lobby, and we wait until we gather one or two more, maybe start at 13:03, and we'll go from there. So thanks very much for your patience, everyone. Okay, we'll kick off, everyone. So my name is Ian Wallace. I'm the Student Recruitment and Liaison Officer for the College of Business and Law, and also a graduate of UCC's Law School myself, including undergrad and postgrad through the LLM, having also taken some modules with Professor McIntyre as well during my LLM. And I'd just like to formally welcome Professor McIntyre as the staff member responsible for these LLMs and discussing these LLMs today. So the pattern of events here is we'll have a program overview for the Marine and Maritime LLM, and then follow it on with a period of questions. So you can ask your questions following that LLM's discussion, and then we'll move on to the second LLM following that. And again, there's opportunities for you to ask your questions then also. This event is recorded, so if you need to drop off the call at any stage, the recording will be made available once it's completed. You can ask your questions in both the chat or the Q&A facility, which are available on the top tab of Microsoft Teams. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Owen McIntyre to deliver the presentation on the LLMs. Thanks, Owen.
Thank you, Ian. And once again, sorry for any trauma you may have suffered in taking any of my modules as a student here. I'll talk first of all about the LLM in Environmental and Natural Resources Law, if I may. And just to give a little bit of background, I mean, what I should say maybe first of all is that these are two closely connected programs. They were developed jointly, they were developed simultaneously, and that allowed us to explore synergies between these two areas, you know, so that there are certain modules which are shared between these two programs. So the LLM in Environmental and Natural Resources Law, or the ENR LLM, as we tend to call it here internally. This has been running now for over 10 years, running successfully, and it goes from strength to strength. And it's the only LLM in Ireland that focuses particularly, that specializes in this rapidly growing area, this very expansive area now of environmental and natural resources law. So at the core of this program, we have a number of core or compulsory modules. These modules are those that students are expected to take in order to, complete this degree. So these include modules such as Method in Environmental Law, where we look at different tools, legal tools that are used in the context of environmental protection, environmental accountability, and environmental governance. So things like the tool of liability, civil and criminal liability, constitutional provisions, particularly constitutional rights, regulatory mechanisms such as licensing, most of our potentially damaging, environmentally damaging activities tend to be regulated by means of a license, where the operator must seek a license, and that license may include specific tailor-made conditions. So we look at a number of regulatory devices and look at how those devices operate, what their advantages and disadvantages are. Specialist sectoral modules then, such as international biodiversity and ecosystems law. Of course, biodiversity is one of the major challenges in environmental law. So we take a deep dive into the international framework that guides EU habitats law, that guides national law in this area. So we follow that all the way down, if you like, from the higher level. Similarly, climate change law and policy, and we look at developments in climate change law and policy developments around climate change governance from the global level to the regional level, right down to the national level. So looking at, for example, environmental litigation. At the international level, we've recently seen these very significant and very influential advisory opinions that have been sought from three international courts, with a fourth one coming from the African Court of Human and People's Rights due to come in the next year. All the way down to domestic environmental litigation, where activists, citizens, children, as we see increasingly, and other vulnerable people may be taking action against a government for failing to regulate, or actions in the private sphere. So actions against polluters, against companies, energy companies, oil companies, etc. So as we know, there is a huge explosion in environmental litigation, with thousands of cases now registered, for example, on the Sabin Centre for Environmental Law. Keep a live database on that. So we will dive into these types of issues, but of course also looking at treaty frameworks, national legislation on the transition towards low carbon economies and that type of thing. We also have one specialist module on international environmental law. So looking specifically at how the international community develop rules, and how those rules develop both through treaties and conventions, but also more organically through customary international law, and how the dynamic between these various sources of international environmental law. In fact, it's very easy to argue that environmental problems have changed the system of international law fundamentally, and that those changes are driving changes in international law way beyond problems of environmental protection. And of course, that's one of the modules that we take in the first semester. We take early because it allows our students then to have better access to the more advanced sectoral modules like international biodiversity and ecosystems law. So we want people to take international environmental law first, and to understand something of the dynamics of that international process of engagement, and how obligations arise in the international system. Other specialist sectoral modules would include marine environmental law and natural resources law. And in addition to that, we have one core module, environmental law and practice. And here my colleague, Professor Anya Ryle, who is also the chair of the Aarhus Convention Compliance Committee currently. And Professor Ryle looks at how international law works in reality, in practice. It's one thing to look at how it notionally operates, how it's written in formal instruments, but how does it work? How do particular issues impact on its effectiveness and its operations? So, for example, costs questions of access to the courts, leave to take a judicial review action against the decision of a governmental body or authority. And in delivering this module, Professor Ryle invites a very rich cast of specialist expert speakers. So we have judges, we have practicing lawyers working on different sides of the climate divide, governmental officials, policymakers, senior civil servants. So a very rich collection of specialist experts who come in and talk about their practice, about their experience, about the challenges that they find in every day in applying, developing, reforming, invoking environmental law, the new, modern, evolving frameworks of environmental law. There are other modules that students may opt to take. For example, we've introduced in the last 2 years a new module on international law and the Sustainable Development Goals. This explores the relationship between international law and the SDGs. The SDGs, of course, where follow the normative aspirations of international law, but they often go further, and there's a very complex dynamic between rules of international law and these non-legally binding sustainable development goals, which are essentially political commitments made, on behalf of the entire community of the international community of states. So we're seeing this really, really interesting dynamic between hard law and soft law, between legal obligation and political commitment, one supporting the other. And so this is a module that we is offered to students on this program, and indeed to students on some other programs. Another one of our options, which is quite unique to this program, is our environmental law clinic. Now, the environmental law clinic, a small number of students can opt, and they have to be selected onto this. But every year we have 6, 8 students who take the environmental law clinic. Now, this is real world experience, because here we have a real client, and we work to the remit of that client. A client comes to us, and it may be an NGO that they want research done to assist them in advocating for a change in the law, or perhaps to prepare for environmental litigation against government or other actors. And we will conduct that research for that client. So it's real world experience, it's under time pressure. It means that the student has to develop skills such as, client management, engaging with the client, holding meetings, managing the agenda, making sure that we don't have, mission creep. Clients will start by asking us one question, giving us one task, and that could grow into 7, 8, or 9 tasks if we're not very careful. So a lot of real world skills, as well as real applied and significant impactful research. So I've just now collected work off our current crop of students on the Environmental Law Clinic. And here we've prepared what's called an amicus curiae brief, a brief by a friend of the court, which we are submitting, and we have to do so by the end of March, which we're submitting to the African Court on Human and People's Rights as an advisory brief to assist the court in its proceedings and its deliberations on an examination of how the African Charter on Human and People's Rights impacts on climate change. So what obligations are inherent in African regional human rights to address the challenge of climate change. In previous years, we've submitted complaints to the regulatory authorities against a major international supermarket chain for misdescribing plastic that they use in certain products as biodegradable, where it was not biodegradable. We had evidence of the fact that it wasn't. We have assisted the Asthma Society of Ireland in actually achieving a change in the law in relation to smoky solid fuels. And that was based on rigorous research by our students. And that research also took account of, we liaised with a research unit, a very high-performing research centre within University College Cork called CRAC, the Centre for Research in Atmospheric Chemistry, and they were able to provide us with all of the hard data we needed to support the legal contentions that we included in our advisory report. Now, very often the Environmental Law Clinic, our outputs are the reports that we produce, the complaints that we submit, opinions that we submit, etc. These are very often picked up by newspapers. Our complaint against a major international supermarket chain was reported on by The Guardian in the UK, but also by The Times, by The Examiner, etc. here. Our work for Asthma Society of Ireland was picked up by the Irish newspapers, as have many other of these clinical projects. Now, the clinical project is tough. It's a lot of work. as I always say to students, these are not 10 easy credits. They're not cheap credits, but students find it very rewarding. Now, as well as taking these core modules, students can and are encouraged to avail of this large range, over 60 modules that we offer at postgraduate level. So often students taking the environmental program will also opt to take some students in the area or take some modules in the area of alternative dispute resolution. We have a specialist program in that area, so looking at different forms of alternative dispute resolution, which plays a big role now in environmental law practice. In human rights, we have a range of human rights modules on offer on the law of the sea and various modules of the Marine and Maritime Masters, for example, but also, to do with public international law, other problems in public international law, such as that of refugees, where, many of our students may be interested in the emerging issue of climate refugees, etc. Now, for students who do not have formal legal background, so who haven't taken an undergraduate law degree and qualified as lawyers, etc., we have structured the program in such a way that it should be accessible to those students to be able to study law at this level. And one of the ways in which we do that is that we encourage, in fact, often require those students without a formal law background to take 2 of our undergraduate environmental law modules. We run 2 options on our BCL undergraduate degree in environmental law, one that I run called Sources and Foundations in International Environmental Law, and one that a colleague runs on Contemporary Issues in Environmental Law. And we ask students on the LLM who haven't got a formal background, haven't studied environmental law before, even if they have a law background, if they haven't studied environmental law before, we ask them to take those modules, but they take them for LLM credits. Each of those modules counts for 5 credits on the LLM program. So, but it just provides access. It's a way of ensuring that students have the necessary knowledge to engage at a deeper, more in-depth level on our more advanced sectoral modules that are in the core and the elective range of options on the LLM program. So I think that probably rounds up what we do in the context of the LLM environmental and natural resources law. So perhaps I could take some questions at that point, Ian, if there are any questions out there.
Just to send a reminder at this stage to pop any into the Q&A section or into the chat. If there's no comments at this stage, which I don't believe there are on, we can proceed into the next LLM if you'd like, and do all questions at the end.
Sure.
If there's any more.
That's no problem at all. But if anybody does have a question as we go, please feel free to put your hand up. I'll see it here on the screen. We're a small group. We can take questions as we go. So whatever people are comfortable doing. The second, and as I explained earlier, the second and related module, our program, LLM program, that we run in parallel is that of marine and maritime law. And as I said, this was developed around the same time. So this has now been running for over 10 years. I think we're in our 11th or 12th, going into our 12th year of each program. And this is even more specialized in many ways because the environmental program is, of course, quite broad and takes account of an increasingly expansive range of topics. Marine and maritime is quite specialized and is quite unique, certainly on the island of Ireland. But there are not so many programs in this specialized niche area really anywhere in the world. And the program, just to give you some idea of its content, it starts with a number of core modules that all students are expected to take. So introduction to the law of the sea, you would expect. Law of the sea would be an absolutely key element, but also admiralty law. Again, so everything to do with shipping, every aspect of accidents in relation to shipping and pollution in relation to shipping and accidents on board and health and safety and some commercial aspects, etc. in admiralty law. Also, marine environmental and natural resources law is a requirement. Now, in teaching some of these, for example, admiralty law, we're blessed to have the input of some very, very, very senior external guest lecturers on these programs who have deep experience from practice in these areas. So, we're very, very lucky to be able to draw on expertise from around the country in relation to delivering these. So particularly in areas like admiralty law, which is, there would not be a huge number of people with real experience. And we're lucky to have two practitioners working on this that have deep experience of admiralty. There are other then options that students would be encouraged to take, other elective modules, such as port law, all legal aspects of managing ports, from questions of shipping and problems with shipping when shipping is in ports, to access to ports for shipping if shipping is dangerous or engaged in certain nefarious activities. And so all aspects of the management and development and operation of ports. Global maritime security. So here we're looking at this, of course, is very topical at the moment. Here we're talking about everything from, interventions in respect of smuggling, contraband, drugs, illegal immigrants, etc., and all the way up to the operations of shadow fleets, the risks to our marine infrastructure, things like undersea cables and undersea pipelines. So all aspects of smuggling, of illegal immigration, of any military or terrorism types of interventions, and protecting marine infrastructure. All of this is dealt with, and this is actually taught by our colleagues, our collaborators on this program from the Irish Navy, or the Irish Naval Service, actually teach that program. So those people who are at the coalface of doing this on behalf of the state, the Irish state, are engaged in this. So, I mean, it really doesn't get any better than that. Other options would include the more commercial side, things like sail insurance and carriage of goods at sea. The vast majority of maritime activity, shipping activity, is really about commerce, is about the carriage of goods by sea. So that raises a whole range of questions. It's a very niche area, but it's a very, very important area around responsibility for accidents, for damage, for loss of goods being transported in commercial transactions by sea. So a specialist module. Again, we also use practitioners with deep experience of this area. Now, like the Environmental and Natural Resources Law program, students on the LLM Marine and Maritime are encouraged to also range across a number of options, a number of modules that are elective to this program, a number of modules that are offered across our other programs. And those that students tend to take are things like alternative dispute resolution, human rights, refugee law, public international law, and different specialist modules in public international law. Also, we find, for example, increasingly that students involved in marine and maritime will take modules such as climate change law and policy, because climate change is one of the big challenges facing the shipping industry and the greenhouse gas emissions, etc., associated with shipping. So that's where the synergy comes in between this program and the Masters in Environmental and Natural Resources Law. There are modules which, of course, are attractive to students on both programs, and so there are those synergies between. Now, like the LLM in Environmental and Natural Resources Law, the LLM in Marine and Maritime Law also has a clinical program, our clinical module, an optional module, which we call Law of the Sea Clinical. And this is run in very close collaboration with our partners in the Irish Naval Service. And this is absolutely unique. We are very, very blessed because that collaboration is really sort of a very generous and a very wholehearted and a very full collaboration. For example, the Irish Naval Service make a naval vessel, a warship, available to us for a day every year. And our students are taken out for what we call the sea trip. They're taken for a day to visit the headquarters of the Irish Naval Service, the naval base at Hall Boline, just outside of Cork City, or Hall Bolin. So they go down, they visit the command center, they visit the Fisheries Intelligence Center, which manages all fisheries, sea fisheries enforcement around the island of Ireland, and in fact in certain other waters as well. Um, but the highlight of the day is where, as part of a clinical exercise, the students are taken out on a naval vessel and we're taken out to sea, and they will then participate in an exercise. And that exercise, I've done this several times with the students, that exercise may be the arrest of another vessel, where the naval service will track another vessel, one of their own, obviously, but they'll track another vessel on radar. They will identify it as being, maybe a, 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 a suspicious, a vessel acting suspicious, which is suspected perhaps of smuggling contraband. The students will be taken by the commander of the vessel, will be taken through the steps for arrest of that vessel. That may mean contacting the embassy of the flag state of that vessel, whether in Dublin, or if there isn't one in Dublin, perhaps in London. Of course, that's all simulated, through communications with the naval headquarters. Then several ribs, several small boats are put in the water. An armed party will go out and apprehend that vessel. Will search for contraband if that's the nature of the exercise. Contraband will then be taken back. Students will be shown how to manage a chain of evidence for a cocaine seizure or something of that sort. So it's a fantastic exercise. It's very exciting. I think it's just one of the greatest days out. I love it. We did one 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago here in Cork. The weather was a little bit rough. We went out to sea. Some students were a little sick. There's nothing we can do about that. That's unavoidable. But you get a sense of the conditions of working on a vessel. So not just in the context of marine security, but also in the context of admiralty law, where the need for health and safety and to due diligence in avoiding accidents. You get a sense of just what a hazardous environment this is when the vessel is rolling in high seas. How important it is that doors are locked and fastened, and that everything that should be bolted down is bolted down. And so you get a real sense of the nature of the environment of working at sea, whether in a naval capacity or a commercial marine capacity. So it's a very, very, very exciting exercise for students. And it ends with, as we come back into port, we have a lovely meal on board. Even those students who weren't feeling well were starting to recover at that stage. We have a meal with the ship's officers in the officers' mess. And then go off and visit some of the other command centers around the naval base before returning home at around 5 or 6 that evening. So, and then there is an assessment. The students produce an assessment, a report, if you like, on the arrest or whatever the exercise was. But they produce a report or an assignment on that exercise, and that is then marked so for their credits for that module. So that's really quite unique to have that level of cooperation, engagement, and access with the Irish Navy is a truly unique feature, and they've been a wonderful partner for this program since its inception, have been centrally involved, and we're very, very grateful for that, and we greatly appreciate that involvement. So those are the two programs. As you can imagine, they each have their own list of core modules. They each have a list of preferred elective modules that students are encouraged to take because they're deeply relevant to the specialist focus of each program. But of course, there are modules which are of relevance to both programs. So a lot of the students on the environmental and natural resources law and on the marine and maritime law will meet each other in classes, etc., and we'll get to know each other. I often think of them, because I manage both programs as program director, I think of them as almost as one cohort, if you like. The cohorts are small. We have around 20 to 22, 23 students per year that we take onto the environmental and natural resources law program, and slightly fewer on the marine and maritime, 10 to 15 students. So together, that's quite a nice cohort who will know each other and work together quite closely. Ian, over to you. in case there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Owen, and thanks very much for that overview of both programs. In the chat, Divya asks a number of questions. Now, you touched on some of the answers in terms of the practical elements. There's a question of actual visiting of a ship, which you covered in depth. But there's also a question in relation to placement opportunities and the exam pattern for the LLM. Now, in reference to this question, it's specific to the maritime law, but I imagine across both
Okay.
of them, the assessment pattern, just to cover for students interested in both.
Yeah, yeah. Um, No, we don't have a formal placement component to the program, and that's simply because it would be quite difficult to actually place 20 plus students every year, in an environmental role, and to place 10 plus 50, 10 to 15 students in a marine role each year as part of a formal process. But what we do quite actively is that we have the contact details for all of the key actors, the key employers, the key agencies that are involved in these areas, and they contact us routinely with any opportunities that come up. So, for example, students on our Environment and Natural Resources Law program will apply for the internships, the paid internships offered by the Environmental Protection Agency here. And in fact, we've had great success in winning those, and our students winning those internship opportunities, which they get a great deal out of. But we also try to liaise with a number of other agencies, and I tend to do a circular. I circulate all of the students with opportunities as and when they come. An example on the Marine and Maritime, which I know you were asking about specifically, is the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. The marine affairs are between two different government ministries in Ireland. The environmental aspects are done by the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment. And we have recently, they contacted us. I don't even know if these roles have been advertised, but they contacted us wondering if we had any graduate students or students coming off the LLM who might be available from June or July on. Ireland is taking over the presidency of the EU for 6 months, and they have a very, very, very active agenda in the marine environmental space. Looking at review of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, looking at the development of legislation on marine protected areas, MPAs, looking at the marine restoration elements of the nature restoration law, the EU nature restoration law. There were 4 specific items that they wanted students to come in paid to come into the department and to work on those. So I provided a number of CVs to the relevant person within the Department of Climate, Energy and Environment, and they're now reviewing those CVs pending, the funding being made available. And they're actually thinking of taking those people on. They said, 6 months they can offer without having to advertise and everything else, but they think that it'll probably be extended to 8 to 9 months because of the amount of work that's involved. As it happens, the lady responsible for this in the department is a former PhD student of mine. So through these kinds of connections, we get the call on these. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, these positions have not been advertised elsewhere. So if none of our students fit the bill, they will go further. But they've come to us first. So there are real opportunities in this regard. But I can't tell you that we have a formal internship program. But we have very, very good connections, good contacts with the marine industry, with fisheries organizations. We do a lot of work and have done a lot of work with the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. The former director of enforcement there was actually a former PhD student of mine as well. So we've had very good connections with these agencies. Next month we run a major conference, the Law and the Environment Conference. There are always 2 or 3 marine specialist sessions at that conference. We run parallel sessions in specialist sectoral areas. So that gives us an opportunity to liaise with, to keep in close contact with key actors in the marine law and governance area. And every year you have a coffee with these people when they come in, with speakers, with other people from those organizations. And I will always ask if there are any opportunities or any, shamelessly, I will check if there are any kinds of opportunities or, internships or placements or anything else going. And often there are. But we try to get the inside track on all of these things. So we do actively pursue this. Not all students are interested in that, because some students are already mid-career professionals who are taking this program maybe on a part-time basis. So for those students who are coming in looking to start a career, opportunities do arise. Obviously I can't guarantee it, but opportunities do arise.
A follow-on question from that, Liam asks, what careers or career pathways do students usually pursue? So I suppose in that vein, on what's the kind of, he asks in particular in relation to the marine and maritime, but I suppose if there's anything that you can cover on the environmental and natural resources, that'd be great as well.
Yeah. So it depends. Before I start to talk about it, it depends on whether somebody is a lawyer, first of all, by training. So whether somebody is pursuing a career in law. If one is pursuing a career in law, then there are niche practices, if you like, that would do, very few in Ireland. And I think those niche practices as exist in Ireland actually contribute to our program in teaching. But when you go to London, when you go to other major centres of commercial legal practice, there are opportunities. Many big commercial firms will have shipping departments, or it'll be a subdivision of a commercial department. So things like, leasing of vessels, the ship finance, shipping, marine insurance. London is a very big centre for marine insurance. There are others, of course, around the world. So that's for someone who's a lawyer. Now, I also find that for those that may be lawyers initially or not, and who are just, maybe have a background in another discipline and are taking the LLM, a lot go into governmental agencies. That seems to be one of the big areas. So into regulatory policy making and governance. Because the marine responsibility for marine governance is spread over a couple of departments and specialist agencies, the Marine Institute and other bodies like that. So we found that people have found their way into those types of roles, but also within things like fishing and agencies involved with fishing. So Bord Iascaigh or the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. We find people going into those. Now, also what we find is that we have quite a large overseas or non-Irish intake, and people are going back and pursuing careers with similar agencies in other countries. So that's the other big role would be in sort of regulation policy making, with government agencies. And also we've had people pursuing careers with intergovernmental agencies, international agencies. So with EU, with different sort of UN bodies and specialist bodies involved with marine issues.
Thanks very much, Owen. And then we just have two semi-related questions in relation to the LLM dissertation, and then also to the assessment style across both LLMs. So Venka writes, when is the LLM dissertation undertaken, and is there an oral defense or similar to a viva of the dissertation? And then also Divya writes, how are the both LLMs assessed in generally speaking across the modules?
I'd start with the second question, Ian, if I may. The vast majority of modules across both programs are assessed by means of written assignments, coursework assignments. And that's very typical of LLM programs. Rather than exams tend to be more the preserve of undergraduate programs and then written assessments. Now, this is something that in years to come, incrementally, we may have to revisit because of the challenge of artificial intelligence, etc., that we want to be absolutely clear that the work we're assessing is the student's own. I think we're okay as yet. I think you can generally spot something that has been done with the assistance of AI. There are telltale signs. We're all much more conscious and aware of this than we were a couple of years ago. So I think that is AI is not quite there yet, if you know what I mean. So we still focus on written assessments. And those written assessments, you're given help in terms of the development of those written assessments. Like there is, all LLM students will take a module in legal research and writing, which will take you through the sort of the requirements of writing, the citation styles that are used in legal writing and used by lawyers, to make sure everybody's very clear on how to structure essays, but also how to avoid pitfalls such as risks of plagiarism and any other issues to do with research integrity. So you're giving, there's a lot of instruction and assistance on that, and on, legal research generally, the sort of the methods and processes of legal research. So, but the vast majority are done by coursework assessment. Now, there are some exceptions. So one area of exception would be, I mentioned in relation to the environmental and natural resources law module, that some students without any background in environmental law would be asked to take 2 undergraduate modules. They are examined because they're in the undergraduate program. So students have to take an examination in those modules. That would be one exam that you would have to do, or 2 exams that you may have to do, if you have to take those modules. The other exception is that across some of our modules as well, we mix it. It's partly coursework assessment, partly an oral presentation. So you will be asked to sort of identify a topic, quite separate from your coursework assessment. It may count for 20 or 25% of your assessment, and you will have to prepare a 10-minute PowerPoint or whatever types of slideshow you want, and then present that to a group of your peers and your teachers, your lecturers, and that will be assessed. Sometimes if the numbers on a module grow above a certain level, it becomes quite impractical to do that, because it would take a day to for example, on climate change law, we always did that. We dropped it, I think, last year, I think maybe the year before, because students started to opt for climate change from, there's a master's run in international diplomacy, but from several other of our 8 taught LLMs at UCC. So we ended up having over 30 students, 35 students. You couldn't run presentations for 35 students. It took a day and a half to do it, and to book out rooms for a day and a half just became very difficult. But so there are some exceptions like that. Then the second question was about the dissertation. The dissertation is submitted at the very end of August or the start of September. Those dates drift in and out around. There's about a week of variation there. So end of August, start of September. Most students, if we're perfectly honest, probably do the vast majority of the work on their dissertation over the summer. Because there's quite a busy, you're kept quite busy during the teaching period, which takes you up into end of March or early April. But having said that, students are encouraged to think about and start to plan their dissertation from very, very early in the program. You will have a number of presentations, as well as taking the legal research and writing module from the very start, which is, to some degree, or maybe to a large degree, concerned with your research project, with your dissertation. You will also have a number of other presentations from people like myself as your program director, talking about how to select, for example, how to select your dissertation topic. How to identify a topic that is of the correct scope for a 12,500 word dissertation. How to identify it, how to refine it, how to test that you've got the right topic, how to do some essential reading around that topic, how to maybe frame it and start to develop an outline so that you know that this is something that you can do within the sort of the confines, within the scope of a postgraduate dissertation, down to how to sort of start preparing your material. In early February, you are asked to submit your proposal for a dissertation. Now, you will have had several meetings with prospective supervisors. You will have had several specialist sessions with the likes of myself and other colleagues, helping you through that process of identifying and refining and narrowing down the scope of your dissertation, and then you submit it. Now, there isn't an oral exam, so it's simply you submit that dissertation in end August, early September. But what you are expected to do, and this is coming up in the next 2 weeks, I think, next week or two, for this year's students, is that you are expected to do a presentation on your dissertation. Your topic will have been selected since early February, and then in early April, we want to see how your progress is, how your work is progressing. So we're trying to keep your nose to the grindstone here, trying to make sure that you don't get distracted with your other assessments and all the other things that you'll be doing. So to make sure that you are putting some thought into it, you're doing some initial reading, you're gathering and compiling your research materials, you're thinking about the outline, your structure, your chapter structure, etc., for your dissertation, and some of your maybe initial findings, or maybe highlight things that are likely to be difficult in terms of getting access to data, or and you will then be expected to do a presentation of 10 to 12 minutes in front of your peers, in front of your supervisor, in front of your program director, and quite possibly other people's supervisors, etc., who'll be in the room. And you'll be questioned on it. What do you think that's feasible? Why are you doing it this way? Have you thought about a comparative study between the Netherlands and Ireland? Have you done? Will you think about? Are you aware of? And a lot of these comments are, make sure you read X, make sure you read Y. There's a paper, I'm going to send you a link to it, that you need to read before you commit to framing your project, etc. So that's very much not an assessment. That oral presentation is not an assessment. You're not graded on this, but it's a way for us to make sure that you're on track, or for us to try and guide you back on track in this large research project.
Thanks very much, Ron. I can see we have just another question from Venka coming in. Coming as an international student, would it be necessary in that case to stay in Ireland over the summer, or could they complete their dissertation from home potentially?
Not at all, Venka. You can really do your dissertation from anywhere. I mean, you will be expected to have a couple of meetings with your supervisor, but those can be done online perfectly well. And, some years ago, the Irish research universities, these sort of the leading universities in Ireland, created this platform called IREL, the Irish Research Electronic Library. So very many of our particularly our journal resources are fully available online. So you can just download individual papers in PDF form, or however you want to use them. So I'm old school. I like to print them off and scribble all over papers. I know my two kids are much more comfortable reading, articles on screen and such like. But you have access. I think IREL gives, as I was reading at one point, access to nearly 130,000 journals or something like that. It's quite extraordinary. Now, of course, the vast majority of these aren't law. And there are still occasional law journals that are not included in IREL because they're practitioner focused. But in my experience, when you're looking for papers, you can always get them. You can email the author. You can, there's always a back way. Mr. Google helps to find sort of pre-publication versions. The writer's own website will often have pre-published versions, pre-publication versions of those papers, so they can always be found. So the net result of that is, stay in touch with your supervisor, make sure that you avail of the assistance and help of your supervisor, but you could be on the moon doing this. I mean, we've had students on the Marine and Maritime Masters who were, I remember our first year running it, who was the skipper of an anchor hauling tug pulling oil rigs around the North Sea the whole time. And he did a great master's and a great dissertation. I remember him explaining to me once that he's never had better internet than he had out on the North Sea, and access to our journals and everything else. So, of course, Venka, you can do this wherever you choose.
I can see that we've two questions about to be asked just by two separate students on, but searing indictment of our own internet standards. If you've better internet in the North Sea, that's for sure. It's just thank yous coming in on. I think if there's an opportunity as well to include your own email address in the chat, if there's any queries.
Absolutely, and please do. I recognize a few names because I've been in touch with a couple of people here who've already had queries, about the programs. And so those that I've already been in touch with, I think I'm very, very happy to get in touch, very happy to answer any questions you have. And it's often much easier to have a quick, chat on Teams or whatever, so that things will occur to you in the context of conversation that you may not think of if you're sending a more formal email, so don't hesitate.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Owen. And we just one final question from Tommaso asks, if you don't have an undergraduate degree in law, do you have any educational suggestion to become more confident with the learning of marine and maritime law?
Well, yeah, what I would suggest that one does is do some reading before you come. I mean, one of the wonderful things about law is that it's not rocket science. It's not. To digress slightly, I remember for years here at UCC, I also taught equity and trusts, which for those who have a law background will know is a subject that students often intensely dislike because it's very old and quite complex and quite conceptual, all to do with investments and how to manage money on behalf of others and things like that. And I remember we used to have a class on a Thursday morning uh, in a room in the food sciences building at UCC. And when I come in, there was a maths, physics, or experimental physics class before us every week. And they would have this whiteboard that ran the entire front of the room, three huge whiteboards together. And it was just completely covered in all of these equations. Some of these equations had like 3 levels above the line and 4 levels below the line. Every Greek letter you can dream of was used in these equations. And as I'd come in and I'd be setting up the uh, the computer system for my teaching materials, etc. And the students were coming in, filing in, and sitting down, and they always looked very miserable. It was Saturday morning or Thursday morning. They'd been out Wednesday night usually. They were here for trusts. It was a rite of passage. They had to go through it. They didn't necessarily enjoy it. And I used to turn around and say, "Look, folks, do you see how lucky you are? You're only doing law. You could be doing this stuff, right? Law is not rocket science. There's no Greek letters used here. You know what I mean? It's very, very straightforward. It's simply a question of reading and understanding what is very largely common sense. So, if the law doesn't make sense, it's probably not right. You know what I mean? Because we all have a sense of what would be fair, what would be effective, and what the law should say. So, what I would suggest you do is go online, find a second-hand introductory book, for example, to the law of the sea or for marine environmental law, something that is maybe aimed at undergraduates, something that is introductory. You'll find a second-hand copy probably for very, very little money. Just go ahead and read it. Yes, there'll be a few things that like all professions, law has its own vocabulary, but you know, uh, uh, you have a thesaurus on your computer. You can look up terms that are unfamiliar, but just do that, and you'll see that this is not nearly as uh, you know as difficult as you may have assumed, as you may have imagined. I mean, lawyers, like all professions, love to make out that what they do is so difficult, so complex, and so special that they have to get paid lots of money to do it. And lawyers are absolutely no different. In fact, lawyers have been doing it much longer than most other professions. But it's really not rocket science. It's really not that mysterious. It's really a question of reading it carefully, thinking about it. And what that will do for your confidence, just to say, actually, I think I understand a little bit about why the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, gives most of the control to flag states as opposed to port states. The whole history of the law of the sea, of shipping law to a large degree, is a tussle for power. Flag states, particularly when they're flags of convenience, shipping companies don't want to be regulated, so they register their vessels in Liberia or wherever else. Uh, but the ports into which those ships come on a weekly basis are much more concerned that they're not a risk to pollution, that they're not smuggling drugs or humans, or that they're not going to break down and sink in the port, etc. So they would like to have control. And when you understand that and you see it, you think that there's nothing particularly mysterious or difficult about this. I find, actually, as a rule of thumb, I find that our non-law graduates probably do a little bit better on average than our law graduates. Maybe our law graduates are a bit smug. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be a disadvantage in either program. Our results statistically show that it is no disadvantage. But I would encourage you just to do some reading, just for your own comfort and confidence.
I think sagest advice, Owen. Thank you very much for that. There doesn't seem to be any more questions in at this stage. If that's the case, we'll draw the event to a close. So thank you very much for including your email address in the chat as well. This recording will be made available to everyone that has attended and also anyone who registered. So if anyone had to drop off at any stage of the call, that's no issue. Thank you all very much for your attendance, and a massive thank you to you, Owen, for your presentations across both programs. And as I say, if there are any further questions, you can ask Professor McIntyre directly, or you can get in touch at lawpostgrad@ucc.ie if it's anything in relation to the application process.
Ian, thank you for the opportunity to talk to these prospective students. And again, I do mean reach out to me if you have any questions at all. So thank you, Ian. Thank you, Aoife, for putting this all together. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Owen. Thanks very much, Aoife.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care, folks.